The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as the 15-year-old's hands trembled on the metal table. After 28 hours without sleep, without his mother, without a lawyer, he heard his own voice say the words that would steal his life. I did it. But he hadn't. If stories like this move you, consider subscribing. Your support helps us bring these forgotten voices to light. Marcus Rodriguez sat in that windowless room at Manhattan's 24th precinct, his muddy sneakers still damp from Central Park. The clock read 3:47 a.m. He'd been there since yesterday afternoon with 4 other boys from his neighborhood: Kevin, Jamal, Andre, and Terrence. 2 detectives loomed over him, asking the same questions for hours. Detective Williams leaned forward. Detective Chen stood behind him, arms crossed. A jogger was in a coma. Someone had to pay. And Marcus, along with 4 other boys from Harlem, had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But what really happened that night? 12 hours earlier, Marcus had been laughing with his friends near the park entrance. It was April 19th, 1989, a warm spring evening. Marcus and his crew Kevin, Jamal, Andre, and Terrence were being loud, throwing rocks at cars. Typical teenage nonsense. Nothing violent. Around 9 p.m., sirens filled the park. Police everywhere. The boys scattered and ran not from guilt, but from instinct. By 10 p.m., all 5 were in custody, confused about why they'd been grabbed while dozens of other kids went home. None of them knew that Jennifer Morrison, a 28-year-old banker, had been found near the reservoir beaten, so savagely that doctors weren't sure she'd survive. None of them knew they were about to become the most hated teenagers in America. The interrogations began immediately. The boys were separated, isolated. Marcus was placed in interview room 3 with Williams and Chen. They started friendly, offered soda, asked about school. Then the tone shifted. Williams leaned across the table and the real interrogation began. They told him his friends were already confessing, already saying Marcus was there. They showed him crime scene photos, Jennifer Morrison's face swollen beyond recognition, tubes everywhere. They asked if he wanted to be responsible for this. If his mother would be proud. Marcus said he didn't know anything. He asked for his mother. Williams said she was coming. It was a lie. The hours dragged on like years. By hour 8, Chen took over, describing prison, violence, death penalties. He painted Marcus as a monster and said confessing was the only way to change that narrative. Marcus insisted on his innocence, his voice desperate. Chen slammed the table, called him a liar, said his mother would be ashamed. By hour 12, Williams returned with the Reed technique, building false sympathy. He said he understood that Marcus probably didn't mean for things to go so far, that he was just following the others. I need to hear it from you, Williams said softly. Marcus said nothing happened, but his resolve was crumbling. By hour 18, Marcus couldn't remember what was real. His sense of time had dissolved. The detectives fed him details, twisted his words, told him witnesses had placed him near the reservoir. What witnesses? They ignored the question. Around hour 22, a new detective entered Drad. He played the ethnic card, said he understood the neighborhood pressures, said Marcus needed to help himself by telling the truth. Think about your mother. Start making this right. By hour 28, Marcus broke. They placed a legal pad in front of him, told him to write what happened. They stood over him, guiding his hand with their words, feeding him details. Marcus wrote what they told him to write, not because it was true, but because he'd been psychologically demolished. When he finished, his hand shook. He'd just confessed to a crime he never committed. Across the precinct, 4 other teenagers were being broken the same way. And their stories would contradict each other in ways that should have destroyed the prosecution's case. Kevin Washington, 14, lasted 30 hours. His interrogation was recorded on video showing a child barely able to keep his eyes open. Detectives fed him information and he repeated it back. When asked what the victim wore, Kevin described white and blue. Jennifer Morrison had been wearing red. He asked for his father 12 times. Was denied 12 times. Jamal Thompson, 15, broke after 18 hours. His confession said the attack happened at 9 p.m. near the playground. Marcus said 10:15 p.m. near the reservoir. Jamal said 7 attackers. Marcus said 5. None of their stories aligned because none of them had been there. Andre Mitchell, 16, held out for 26 hours. When he finally confessed, he described the victim wearing white sneakers with red laces. Morrison wore Nike shoes with white laces. He described scratches on her arms. The medical examiner found no defensive wounds. Terrence Hayes, 14, was the youngest. His interrogation was never recorded. Police claimed equipment failure. His written confession was the most detailed, describing acts that forensic evidence proved never happened the way he described. But here's what nobody wanted to hear. There was no physical evidence connecting any of them to the crime. None. No DNA. No blood. No hair. No fibers from their clothing. The rape kit contained semen that didn't match any of the 5 boys. When prosecutors got the lab results, they had a problem. So they made a choice. They decided there must have been a 6th attacker, someone unidentified who committed the sexual assault. A theory unsupported by any evidence. The judge allowed them to proceed anyway, ruling the DNA was not dispositive given the confessions. The trial began in June 1919. And it wasn't about truth, it was about vengeance. The media had already convicted them. Headlines called them animals and a wolfpack. Donald Trump took out full-page ads in 4 newspapers demanding the death penalty, spending $85,000 to cement public opinion. Politicians competed to sound tougher on crime. Mayor Ed Koch called it the most vicious crime he'd seen in office. By jury selection, finding impartial jurors was impossible. Everyone had seen the headlines. Everyone had decided guilt. Prosecutor Elizabeth Lederer understood that emotion would win this case, not evidence. Her opening statement was surgical in its manipulation. She described Jennifer Morrison as innocence, personified a young banker who loved running, who had her whole life ahead. She showed the jury photos of Morrison's injuries so graphic that 2 jurors asked to be excused. The judge denied them. Then Lederer turned to the defendants, sitting in ill-fitting suits, looking younger than their years. She didn't call them boys. She called them attackers, assailants. She described their confessions in painstaking detail, playing Kevin's videotape repeatedly. The image of an exhausted child admitting to crime was powerful, more powerful than any forensic proof could counter. When defense attorneys objected to the lack of physical evidence, Lederer had her answer ready. The defendants have told us what happened in their own words. Their confessions are detailed and corroborated. Sometimes the most powerful evidence is truth spoken by those who were there. The fact that the truth contradicted itself, contradicted all evidence, and had been extracted through torture didn't matter to a jury desperate for justice. The defense tried to fight back. Public defender Michael Warren Representing Marcus, brought in Dr. Saul Cassin. A psychologist who specialized in false confessions, Dr. Cassin explained to the jury how teenagers are uniquely vulnerable to coercive interrogation, how sleep deprivation impairs judgment as severely as intoxication, how the Reed technique, the method used on these boys, is designed to break down resistance regardless of actual guilt. These boys were interrogated for 14 to 30 hours, Dr. Cassin testified, his voice steady. They were denied parents and lawyers. They were told their friends had already confessed. They were fed information about the crime and asked to repeat it. What you're hearing in these confessions isn't memory, it's contamination. Prosecutor Lederer's cross-examination was withering. She asked if he was suggesting the NYPD fabricated confessions. He said no, coercion was different from fabrication. She asked if false confessions were common. He said more common than people realized, especially among juveniles. She asked if he had proof these specific confessions were false. He cited the lack of physical evidence and the contradictions. She asked if he'd ever been an NYPD detective. He said no. She dismissed him. Warren also walked the jury through the contradictions. He created a timeline showing that if Marcus's confession was true, the attack happened at 10:15 p.m. If Jamal's was true, 9 p.m. If Andre's was true, there were 7 attackers. If Terrence's was true, 5. The described wounds didn't match the medical reports. The timeline was impossible. The location contradicted where Morrison was found. Ladies and gentlemen, Warren said in his closing, if you believe Marcus's confession, you must disbelieve the others. They can't all be telling the truth because they contradict each other on every material fact. The only logical conclusion is that none of them are telling the truth because none of them were there. It should have created reasonable doubt. But it was one public defender against an army of prosecutors, against a city demanding blood, against headlines that had already written the verdict. Lederer's closing lasted 3 hours. She reminded them of Morrison in the hospital. She played the confessions again. She said the inconsistencies didn't matter because memory is imperfect. She said the DNA didn't matter because there might have been others who were never caught. The defendants have told you what happened, Lador said, her voice rising with righteous fury. They've confessed. And now they want you to believe they made it all up. That the NYPD convinced 5 unconnected teenagers to confess to the same crime. Ladies and gentlemen, that defies logic. These defendants are guilty, and justice demands you say so. The jury deliberated for 10 days. Later, some would admit they'd had doubts, that the lack of DNA troubled them, that the contradictions were hard to ignore. But in the end, 5 confessions were too much to overcome. The weight of those words, I did it, spoken by children, recorded on tape, written in their own hand, was more powerful than any evidence or logic could counter. On August 18, 1990, the 4 women stood, the courtroom packed with reporters, families, activists. Marcus sat at the defense table, his mother behind him, both holding their breath. On the count of assault in the 1st degree, how do you find? Guilty. Marcus's mother gasped. Marcus closed his eyes. His childhood ended in that single word. On the count of robbery, ... guilty. On the count of riot, ... guilty. The litany continued. Guilty, guilty, guilty. 5 boys, 5 sets of verdicts. Marcus Rodriguez, 5 to 10 years. Kevin Washington, 5 to 10. Jamal Thompson, 5 to 15. Andre Mitchell, 5 to 15. Terence Hayes, 5 to 10. When the gavel fell, 5 families, worlds ended. Jennifer Morrison, still recovering, believed justice had been served. The real attacker remained free. They were sent to different facilities across New York, deliberately separated. Marcus went to Harlem Valley, hours from his family. Kevin and Terence to Tryon. Jamal to Brookwood. Andre, at 16, to transitional facility leading to adult prison. Inside, they were marked men. Crimes against women rank at the absolute bottom, and everyone knew what these boys had supposedly done. Marcus's first week was violent. Day 3, an older inmate confronted him, had seen his face in newspapers. "You one of them rapists." Marcus tried explaining innocence, but in prison everyone claims innocence. 3 punches before guards intervened. For days in infirmary with broken nose and concussion, he learned fast. Keep your head down. Avoid eye contact. Learn safe corners. Eat quickly. Get back to your cell. Survival meant accepting bottom status. Andre Mitchell, at 18, faced worse at downstate maximum security. Second month, 3 inmates cornered him in the shower, carved rapist into his left shoulder with a shank. 47 stitches. The scar permanent, a brand he'd carry forever, even after exoneration. Kevin Washington, youngest at 14, was placed in protective custody 23-hour lockdown. 1 hour daily for shower and exercise, always alone. It protected from violence, but destroyed psychologically. Isolation drove him into depression. Stopped eating, speaking. Prison psychologists diagnosed PTSD. Treatment meant medication leaving him numb. They wrote letters maintaining innocence, hoping someone would listen. Marcus wrote his mother weekly about violence, fear, losing himself. She visited when she could afford the 5-hour bus trip, sitting across plexiglass, crying, promising truth would come out. Jamal Thompson tried maintaining his education-earned GED, took correspondence courses, but 1994, 4th year incarcerated, he attempted suicide after his girlfriend said she couldn't wait anymore. Swallowed stockpiled pills. Cellmate found him unconscious. Survived barely. When he returned to population, something had broken. Started talking about accepting guilt just to end the torture. By late 1990s, journalists began questioning the case. The Innocence Project reviewed DNA evidence. They saw immediately what should have been obvious. DNA excluded all 5. Confessions were textbook coercion. But getting courts to admit mistakes takes time. In 2001, 12 years after the attack, everything changed. Mateo Reyes, a convicted serial rapist serving life for multiple assaults, confessed to his prison counselor. He'd attacked the jogger in Central Park in 1989. Alone, no teenagers, just him. He described details about the assault that had never been made public tales that matched the crime scene exactly. Details none of the 5 boys had gotten right. Prosecutors were skeptical at first. Why confess to a solved crime? But Ada Nancy Ryan investigated and saw immediately what should have been obvious. Reyes's confession matched the evidence perfectly. The boys' confessions contradicted everything. Then came the DNA test. November 2002. Mateo Reyes's DNA was a perfect match to the semen from Jennifer Morrison. The statistical probability of it belonging to someone else, less than 1 in 6 billion. If prosecutors had run the DNA through the database in 1989, they would have found the match. Reyes was arrested for other rapes just months after the Central Park attack. But they'd had their confessions. They'd closed their case. 5 innocent teenagers went to prison while the real rapist served time for other crimes. On December 19, 2002, Dar Robert Morgenthau filed a motion to vacate all 5 convictions. The hearing was brief. No apology, no acknowledgement of failure. Just, the convictions are hereby vacated. The defendants are free to go. Marcus walked out of the courthouse at age 28. He'd gone in at 15. His mother waited on the steps, both crying, unable to speak. Exoneration doesn't erase prison. It doesn't give back the years stolen. But freedom didn't mean the nightmare ended. Marcus came home to changed Harlem. His mother aged 20 years, hair white, hands arthritic from working 2 jobs for lawyers and prison visits. His siblings, children when arrested, were adults now treating him like a stranger. He tried rebuilding, applied for jobs 47 in 6 months. Got 2 interviews. Both ended when employers recognized his name. Exoneration didn't matter. We're looking for someone without ... complications. Nightmares started 3 months after release. He'd wake screaming, back in the interrogation room, back signing that confession. Therapist diagnosed complex PTSD. Marcus couldn't shake hypervigilance, inability to trust authority. Seeing police spiked his heart rate. Too many questions felt like walls closing in. Trauma was wired into his nervous system. Permanent rewiring exoneration couldn't undo. Kevin. Washington struggled with addiction, numbing the pain. Overdosed twice in 2003. By 2006, homeless in a Bronx shelter. Died 2019 from drug complications. Death barely noticed by media that had destroyed him. Jamal Thompson attempted suicide again in 2004, nearly jumping in front of a train. Bystander pulled him back. 6-month psychiatric hospitalization. Eventually became criminal justice activist, educating about false confessions. But reliving trauma repeatedly was exhausting. Andre Mitchell became lawyer fighting wrongful conviction cases. But the scar rapist carved by inmates never faded. Long sleeves year-round. Never married. Never let anyone close enough. Terrence Hayes became teacher working with at-risk youth. But parents Googled his name. Some demanded removal. The label followed everywhere. In 2014, New York settled for $41 million, approximately $1 million per year of stolen life. No admission of wrongdoing. No apology. Detective Williams retired with full pension, still claiming guilt. System protected itself, paid debt, moved on. Marcus bought his mother a house, funded therapy. But money couldn't buy back stolen years, destroyed relationships, embedded trauma. He was 41 but felt ancient, defined by something done to him at 15. The case became symbol coerced, confessions, racial profiling, prosecutorial misconduct. Ken Burns made documentary in 2012. Netflix created miniseries 2019. Exposure helped change. Laws recorded juvenile interrogations. Parental presence required. Confessions under duress inadmissible. But changes came too late for them. They were the sacrifice that led to reform. Their suffering had meaning, people said. But meaning doesn't heal trauma. Change doesn't restore innocence. Today, Marcus lives in New Jersey, working at a non-profit helping formerly incarcerated people. He never married, never had children, never fully escaped that night in Central Park. He still has nightmares about the interrogation room. still feels his hand shaking as he signed that confession, still hears Detective Williams's voice, still wonders if maybe he should have fought harder, resisted longer, trusted that truth would save him. But he knows better now. Truth doesn't save you when the system has decided you're guilty. Truth is whatever breaks you first. And in that windowless room in 1989, a 15-year-old boy was broken so thoroughly that even exoneration couldn't put him back together. The detectives who broke him went home feeling accomplished. The prosecutors who ignored DNA built careers on these convictions. The politicians got their headlines. The media sold millions. Everyone got what they wanted except the 5 boys who paid for a crime they didn't commit. Jennifer Morrison, whose real attacker remained free for years. When Morrison learned the truth in 2002, she was devastated. 5 innocent teenagers had served years in prison while her actual attacker had been free. She'd been used as a symbol, her suffering weaponized to destroy innocent lives. In later interviews, she would acknowledge that justice hadn't been served not for her, and certainly not for them. The 5 boys who weren't there became 5 men who can never fully leave. Some prisons don't have bars. Some sentences never end. And some confessions echo forever in a system that values convictions over truth. The cost of that false confession was 13 years of Marcus's life. But it was also his innocence, his trust, every relationship that failed, every job he didn't get, every nightmare at 3 a.m. back in that room with Williams, telling him confessing was the only way out. The criminal justice system failed these boys in every way, failed to protect their rights, failed to verify confessions, failed to prioritize evidence, failed to acknowledge mistakes, and even when forced to admit error, failed to make them whole. But the system didn't fail alone. Society failed them. Every person who assumed guilt before evidence, who believed headlines without questioning, who demanded vengeance without truth, they all failed these boys. This is the cost of a system that prioritizes convictions over truth, that values confessions over evidence, that measures success by conviction rates rather than accuracy. The reforms that followed recorded interrogations. Parental presence requirements represent progress. But their progress bought with Marcus's childhood, with Kevin's life, with Jamal's mental health, with Andre's trauma, with Terrence's stolen years. Reforms written in their blood and tears. And it's still happening. Right now, teenagers are being coerced into false confessions. People are convicted on weak evidence. The Central Park 5 are famous because DNA proved their innocence. How many others have no DNA to save them? Marcus thinks about that often, about people still trapped, names unknown, innocence, improbable. He thinks about the randomness, how being in the wrong place destroyed his entire life, how having brown skin in a city that wanted blood was enough, somewhere. In some interrogation room right now, a teenager sits exhausted and terrified, being told confessing is the only way out. Maybe they're innocent. Maybe no one will believe them. Maybe they'll break, just like Marcus did, and spend decades paying for nothing. And maybe years from now, DNA or a real perpetrator's confession will prove their innocence. But by then, their childhood will be gone, their family relationships destroyed, their psychological wounds permanent. Exoneration will come too late. This is the cost of truth in a system that doesn't want to hear it. This is the price of innocence in a world that prefers convenient guilt. The 5 boys who confessed to a crime that never happened are now 5 men, who carry that confession like a scar, visible or invisible, but always present, always painful, always a reminder of what was stolen from them in the name of justice in that interrogation room. When Marcus's hand trembled and he wrote words that weren't true, he made a choice that wasn't really a choice. A 15-year-old child, alone and terrified, convinced by adults that lying was the only way to survive, and in that moment, the system designed to protect him became the weapon that destroyed him. This is the cost of a justice system that prioritizes convictions over truth. After reading Marcus's story, do you think the reforms that followed were enough? Can money ever compensate for stolen childhoods? What would you have done in that interrogation room at age 15, after 28 hours without sleep, without your parents, without hope? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. These stories matter. These voices deserve to be heard. If you believe in sharing stories that challenge our understanding of justice, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Every subscription helps us continue bringing these important stories to light. Thank you for watching. Remember, truth matters, even when the system doesn't want to hear it.